Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the incredibly rapid and, honestly, terrifying military expansion of the Third Reich between 1939 and 1942. But more importantly, we're going to uncover how that relentless territorial momentum actually masked an escalating, systematic genocide playing out right in the shadows of the conflict.
We start off in April 1939. Now, to many people, there was still this illusion of peace, but listen to this chilling quote from Joseph Goebbels' diary. "The Führer is fated like no other mortal has ever been." It really shows that plans for a massive conflict were already firmly taking shape behind the scenes. This was penned right around Hitler's grandiose 50th birthday spectacle in Berlin, which, was a massive event deliberately designed to showcase military might and basically warn Western powers not to interfere.
So here is our roadmap for today. First, the spark of World War. Second, the fall of the West. Third, Operation Barbarossa. Fourth, a global conflict ignites. And finally, the path to genocide. Section 1. The Spark of World War, 1939. The diplomatic shockwave that officially ignited the conflict was an infamous Devil's Pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Non-Aggression Pact, signed in August 1939. It's fascinating because these two fierce ideological enemies temporarily allied just for their own immediate strategic gains. For Germany, it was simple: secure the eastern flank so they could attack Poland with total impunity without worrying about a two-front war. And for the Soviet Union? Well, Stalin knew a conflict was coming eventually, so his goal was purely to buy time until 1942 or 43 to build up the Red Army. The crucial point here is that the city of Danzig was really just a plaything for intimidation. Sure, German propaganda leaned heavily on reclaiming Danzig, but Hitler had clearly stated to his military leaders that it wasn't about Danzig at all. The invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939, which actually prompted Britain and France to declare war, was fundamentally about securing expansion and Lebensraum, or living space, for Germany. Section 2. The Fall of the West, 1940. The Blitzkrieg was, frankly, staggeringly fast. It broke the resistance of Allied armies in just a matter of weeks. In April 1940, Operation Weserübung targets Denmark and Norway. Then, by May, a massive push of 118 divisions sweeps through neutral Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg, and directly into France. It happened so fast that by June, the Wehrmacht was marching into an undefended Paris, defeating Allied forces that actually had more soldiers and artillery. But despite the absolutely devastating collapse of France, 340,000 British and French soldiers were successfully evacuated by sea from Dunkirk. This massive, desperate retreat was absolutely crucial. It allowed Winston Churchill, who had just taken office, to keep British defiance alive and somehow turn a disastrous military defeat into a really powerful symbol of resistance. Section 3. Operation Barbarossa, 1941. Frustrated by Britain's absolute refusal to surrender or even negotiate, Hitler's attention pivoted sharply eastward in 1941. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, wasn't just some standard military maneuver. It was heavily driven by ruthless economic objectives. Hitler's strategic logic was that destroying the Soviet Union would shatter Britain's last hope for a continental ally. But beyond that, they desperately needed to exploit agricultural produce in Ukraine and capture crucial raw materials like Baku's oil fields just to feed the Nazi war machine. And the darkest part? German planners fully anticipated that achieving these economic goals would result in the starvation of tens of millions of Soviet people. 3 million. That staggering figure represents the 3 million Soviet soldiers captured during the remarkably swift initial weeks of Operation Barbarossa. Nazi propaganda portrayed these prisoners as inferior, and tragically, hundreds of thousands of them were just left to die from deliberate, severe neglect, freezing and starving to death in makeshift provisional camps. Section 4. A global conflict ignites. So, as unforgiving winter snowdrifts and sub-zero temperatures finally halted the ill-equipped German advance right outside Moscow, the coordinates of the war abruptly changed across the globe. On December 7, 1941, the surprise Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor plunged the United States into a patriotic frenzy. America immediately declared war on Japan, and this singular event officially transformed what had been an intense European struggle into a truly, fully global war. Almost immediately after, Hitler declared war on the U.S. His logic? He figured Japanese forces would tie down the Americans in the Pacific,
which would finally free his submarines to completely dominate the Atlantic. U-boat Lieutenant Commander Top actually boasted about the initial success, saying, "This time we gave the Americans a torchlit procession of burning tankers." It's chilling. Germany was hoping to completely choke off the vital Atlantic supply lines to Britain and literally starve them into submission.
Section 5. The Path to Genocide. Now, we have to soberly examine the parallel horror of this era. We need to see how this rapid territorial conquest actively paved the way for systematic mass murder. This bureaucratic escalation of atrocities definitely didn't happen overnight. It was a horrifying progression. It moved from the targeted killing of patients in 1939 under Action T4 to the concentration and forced starvation of populations in ghettos. Then it escalated into the deployment of SS task forces, murdering civilians by the hundreds of thousands, leading all the way up to the outright genocide envisioned by spring 1942, the final solution, targeting 11 million people.
Looking closer at the very beginning of this escalation, we have Action T4. Initiated in 1939, this was a program designed to murder tens of thousands of mentally or physically disabled patients. And while the propaganda tried to frame it as a release from suffering, the operation was actually carried out so secretively that relatives received falsified notes blaming their loved ones' deaths on totally made-up ailments like pneumonia.
As the Wehrmacht pushed deep into Soviet territory during Barbarossa, a new brutal phase began. Special SS task forces were deployed behind the front lines starting in July. They basically acted as a massive, lethal dragnet. In just the first 5 months of the campaign, over 500,000 victims were murdered by these hit squads. And to cover their tracks, the regime officially framed these systematic liquidations as mere retaliatory measures against partisans. Simultaneously, in occupied Poland, the cruelty was taking another form. 400,000 Jewish people were forcibly crammed into the Warsaw Ghetto alone. I mean, just imagine being trapped in those appalling, unsanitary conditions. The lack of food and medicine was deliberately designed to kill, and it resulted in roughly 5,000 deaths every single month. The truly terrifying reality is that by the spring of 1942, these isolated, partial genocides had congealed. The bureaucratic apparatus was now fully in place. This dark momentum had become completely independent of any single individual. It transformed into a fully functional, continent-wide machine entirely dedicated to the physical destruction of European Jews. This heartbreaking quote really brings us back from the macro statistics of millions dead right down to the deeply human, micro-level suffering of those trapped in this nightmare. A doctor in the Warsaw Ghetto observing the rampant starvation noted, "People fall asleep in a bed or on the street and are dead by the following morning." It forces us to confront the daily agonizing reality of the victims. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a final thought. How does a modern society so rapidly dismantle peace and descend into unchecked systemic barbarity? Looking at how quickly Europe fell from the illusion of peace in early 1939 to the mechanized genocide of 1942, it really urges us all to reflect deeply on the absolute fragility of civilization in the face of radical ambition. Thank you so much for exploring this history with me today, and I hope this look at the past leaves you hungry to learn more.